Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. My name is Ana Rojas. I work with IUCN's Global Gender Office, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Embracing Diversity, Increasing Girls and Young Women's Interest in STEM and the Energy Sector. I want to thank you, our panelists, and USAID for their constant support in making this series of webinars happen. Before we get started, I would like to run you through some virtual housekeeping matters. First, as you have seen, participants are being muted throughout the webinar, and that is to ensure that we have the best connectivity. Although you are muted, that doesn't mean that we cannot interact. If you take a look at your screen to the top right side of your screen, you will see that you have a chat function. So if you have questions or comments throughout the presentations, please make sure to share those with us. And my colleague, Maria Prebel, who's managing the behind-the-scenes settings, would be collecting those questions from your side. If you're also having technical problems, let us know. Maria would be in a position to help you. Also, as you can see, we have a handout available, and the video and the presentations of this webinar will be uploaded to Gecko's green platform after completion. So you will be able to tune in afterwards or share and look into the presentations. So without further ado, I would like to get started with the introduction of our webinar. As you know, Gecko is an initiative that stands for Gender Equality and Climate Change Opportunities, which is a 5-year program launched by USAID and IUCN in 2014. And as part of our activities, Gecko has developed a specific energy pillar of work, in which we try to bring together the discussions that are happening in the gender sphere and sectors to the energy sector and the mitigation discussion. So hence our work and tying in with climate change. Today's topic of interest is increasing women's participation in the energy sector, both as technicians and as decision makers, because their participation remains low. The World Economic Forum Jobs Report of 2016 has calculated that women make up only 15% of the energy labor force. A recent IUCN Environment and Gender Information dataset reveals that women hold only 10% of top energy minister positions. And the reasons for women's low participation in the sector relate to social stereotyping and the effects this has in early education stages, where girls are less likely to be encouraged to engage in activities that would later on increase their options for joining science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, so STEM. And why are we concerned about this fact? It's also because the World Economic Forum report says that industries that are anticipated to have the most growth in the future, say architecture, engineering, computing, and math, are the ones where women are joining the least. And when we transfer this to the energy sector, though we see that the most traditional sector, which is oil, gas, has had a reduction in their job creation, we see that there is a very different pattern when it comes to renewable energy technologies, where there's actually the potential for growth. So IRENA's 2016 job report says that 1.8 million people worldwide are working in the renewable sector. And we see that in some countries, like in China, there are more people working in the renewable energy sector than in oil and gas. Also in the US, I mean, the number of people working on solar technologies alone is higher than those working on gas and coal extraction. So when we look at future, where Arena expects that 24 million people will be working in the renewable energy sector by 2030, we can see that there is a great opportunity for women to also come and join the new labor market. And as we know, evidence reveals that gender diversity in the workforce can drive innovation, which will be more needed in the future, will open new pathways for technology deployment, and have a positive effect on business performance and investments. So bringing girls and young women into STEM fields and later on also joining the energy sector seems to be not only the right thing to do, but a financially smart thing to do. And the way we're going to approach this topic today is by, of course, this introduction and welcome to all of you. And then we're going to have Magola Makololo, who's going to introduce us briefly to the framework as to why it is difficult to have girls and young women join STEM and the energy sector. And Magola is going to also give us an example of what could be done against this from a policy perspective. So we're going to zoom in after the framework into South African policy context. And we're going to follow with Sandra Tererai from Tangana, which is a movement that is working in Southern African countries to increase girls' interest in STEM. Very much looking forward to learning more about how she's doing that. And then we're going to close with Anne-Marie Horowitz. And what Anne-Marie is going to do is she's going to take us back to a more global perspective, because her initiative, C3E, works across continents with young women to increase their interest, but also retain them in the energy sector. And once we've had this travel around the world and ages and interventions, we'll come to a session of questions and answers. So please remember to send in your comments and questions throughout. If you want to have more information about our work, please feel free to reach out to my colleague Maria Preble or to myself, and to visit our Glean platform. Before I introduce our first speaker, I also want to mention that today's webinar would not have been possible without the support and collaboration with Power Africa, particularly with its Women in African Power Network, WEAP. All three panelists of today are engaged in the network, and we're very happy for their support and the support that we're receiving from Power Africa to make this webinar and its content available to you. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Magola Makololo. She has worked as an electrician, system engineer, and in various management roles of South African power utilities, including Eskom and Sasol. She is the current acting deputy director for energy in the Department of Public Enterprises, the DPE, of South African government, with shareholders oversight on Eskom and PBMR. Magola led the energy team at the DPE during the peak load shedding in South Africa, with full participation in the war room, which I understand is a very specific meeting led by the Deputy President of South Africa. She is the co-founder of STEM It Forward, an NGO that worked to stimulate interest and support young Black girls to take up a career in STEM fields, and she has been elected as one of the top 80 emerging leaders in science technology in Africa and the Middle East. Magola, for us, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna, for that introduction. I assume everybody can now see my screen, and I think you've given a very I think you've given a very good context in terms of starting the conversation today. I think this is a very exciting topic for me, but above anything else, I think it's a very critical topic that we need to have as women, and I think broadly as society, to ensure that we broaden the participation of women broadly in the economy globally, but also specifically in the STEM field and also in energy as a rapidly changing sector throughout the world. So my presentation will look at what are the challenges in terms of women getting into the STEM fields, and those who do get into the STEM fields staying in those fields throughout their careers, and also looking at suggestions at some of the things that we could look at to try and broaden the participation. Slide mode. Okay. In 2012, McKinsey did a report that looks at what's holding women back. And there was a class of issues that they came up with. And the first one was around the individual's mindset, so the beliefs that we have about ourselves and our environment, and also the environment within which we need to operate. There were structural obstacles, which is informed primarily by history and how various sectors have always been structured and participate, and how the participation has always been composed. Lifestyle issues in terms of issues of society and the traditional roles that women have played in society historically, and why women fail to let go of the traditional roles, or why it is difficult to make a transition into a different type of environment, and also the institutional mindset. And I will delve into details in the next slide in terms of what are these specific issues that confront women in terms of joining the STEM field. The first one, so there are two broad categories of issues, which is our internal barriers, so how we see ourselves, and also the external barriers in terms of the environment that we are supposed to interface with. The first one is around the insecurities and how we see ourselves as women. It's actually quite interesting listening to the news yesterday when Oprah Winfrey, this is one of the most renowned women, said it was only when Donald Trump ran for the presidency of the United States that she decided that she herself could do it. And this is one woman that we all look up to and we all admire, and she looks so full of life. And if somebody at that level still has that level of insecurity, that would still take cue from a man to be able to make a decision that she is also good enough to run for a presidency. So it seems to be an inherent problem that women had in terms of how we see ourselves, and also how we assess our readiness in terms of taking up roles in the STEM field. And the second, also waiting to be recognized. So we require, women more often than not, we require somebody else to tell us that you are ready or you could take up a job, rather than that being an active decision that an individual makes and actually takes up a role. On the perceived threats, it's because we are not familiar with the environment within which we need to walk in. We don't know anybody who's any other woman that's in that environment. We struggle. We perceive the environment as threatening, and we perceive the environment as not very welcoming, because we don't see other people in that environment that are like us or that come from where we come from. And then the failure to capitalize on relationship and political savvy, and this is about us being able to ask for the things that we want upfront and not being apologetic about it or waiting for others to make certain offers about what is available and what is not. In terms of the external barriers is, the lack of role models. There's never been women, and I think the narrative is slowly changing, because, we are increasingly getting women in the STEM fields. We're seeing a lot of scientists, engineers that are women. But there are areas in which there is lack of role models. I always make this example about myself, that when I started engineering, I did not know anybody that was an engineer at the time. It was just a decision I made based on my curiosity, and also based on things I was reading up. But I actually had not interfaced with a living engineer that I could have related to in that aspect. So that also makes it difficult, and that's why it is easier for people to revert back to traditional roles of women, because those are the sort of roles that we have. Social roles and expectation, and this talks to the support that women actually get in terms of being able to build up a career, and this applies broadly even outside of the STEM fields. But the social roles of women having to be a mom, have to take time out of your career to be able to bear children, to raise kids, and also having building up a society within which there can be a balancing act in terms of the roles that parties have to play. So do you have a supportive partner who actually understand that your role is not confined to a domestic role, at the very least having the opportunity to choose a role that you want to play as a woman, and not being a default position that you have to play that role within the social setting. The last point is on the environment within which the STEM field is set, and the old boys networks. I think any one of us who has entered this field over the last decade, over the last 2 decades, would testify to the fact that it's difficult being in that environment. I think, firstly, in some instances, the lack of effort to actually be a bit more welcoming. You are expected to assimilate into the environment and be like a boy, or join the boys' network, rather than the environment itself having to change and having to be a bit more neutralized and not biased towards any one gender. So how do we broaden participation? I like this quote by President Barack Obama, where he says, nations are successful when their women are successful. And this can be simplified in saying that, if you're to do a simple statistics, and I know the number may not be exact, and to say as a society, we are 50-50 men and women, and if you've got 50% of society that's not participating in the economy, so clearly you are not fully utilizing the capacity and the possibilities that you could have from an innovative perspective, and just broadly participation in terms of growing or utilizing the human capital that is available within society. So it's important, not just for women, as for ourselves, but for society broadly, that women are able to participate. So how do we broaden the participation? To give a very specific South African perspective, the South African government has legislative instruments to enforce gender equity across sectors, which includes employment equity. The Employment Equity Act sets very specific targets that needs to be achieved at different levels of management and different levels from junior management, all up until executive management. And we've seen progress in areas. But, in an ideal world, we want to live in a world where this comes naturally without having to use legislative instruments to be able to effect change. There are also procurement requirements to say, if you are doing business with the state, you would have to ensure that you support a certain level of your procurement needs to come from women-owned businesses. And I think this is quite important for South Africa in particular, because if you look at Eskom, which is the largest energy company we have in South Africa, is one of the biggest spenders that we have in the country. And if you're going to enforce that kind of requirement on a company like that, you are most likely going to be able to see the impact that it has in terms of being able to develop women-owned businesses within the energy sector. I think the Sustainable Development Goals also sets very specific objectives, and I think in the main it identifies primary education as a key enabler to be able to ensure that we have the right throughput of girls, right from primary levels all the way to tertiary levels into the labor market. And the first one is that we need to ensure that by 2030 all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and primary education, leading to effective learning outcomes, and to also ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early education development, care, and pre-primary educations, and that they are ready for primary education. And there's a lot of, if you are able to get hold of the Sustainable Development Goals, there's a lot of detail that goes into what each one of these objectives stands for, because I think it's easier to just set an objective, but what it actually takes to achieve it is a bit more involved than that. And that it also sets an objective to eliminate gender disparities in education and to ensure equal access to all levels of education and vocational training. And we know that if we were to look at global statistics, there are still examples where girls going to school is still a big issue that is up for debate, where the decision does not lie either with a mother or with a child to be able to freely make a choice to participate in the schooling system. I think in the early last year, the Statistician General for South Africa released some statistics in terms of the state of education in South Africa, and I looked at the statistics broadly, because it's one thing to look at sector-specific issues, but we need to look at the state of education or early education broadly before we can look at whether we are actually getting through the right levels of numbers through the education system to be able to have the right pool of people to be able to join the various sectors where participation is required. And some of the interesting statistics from the survey, the community survey 2016, revealed that early childhood development phase in South Africa reaches only about 39% of the population. Now, that's a very concerning numbers, and this is a number. Early childhood education refers to ages between, I think, up until ages of 5. And I mean, that is a very concerning number, because then you ask yourself, there is a proportion, about 60% proportion, that doesn't start early within education. And that enrollment in post-education reaches only about 3.6%. So only 3.6% is able to get through a university kind of schooling. So, and this is driven by a number of factors. First one could be, the fact that in South Africa, we have not increased the number of higher learning education centers that are available, but that also the modes of delivery of education have stayed the same as the traditional ones that we have. And so you even if you were to increase the throughput from childhood to a higher number, 80, 90, 100%, you would still struggle on the university side to be able to take through all the students that need to come through a university student to be able to get whatever degree, be it a STEM degree, social science or economics, or whichever else. So there are broader issue in terms of the education system. And it also states that women still constitute a greater proportion of those who had no schooling. So there is still a certain number, a greater number of women, and I'll show you some statistics later around women not being able to enter the schooling system, and that is driven primarily by social issues, and that there is still issues around proximity to schools, having a lot of children that still have to walk school, and this is mostly applicable within the rural areas where the locality of schools and communities is not always the same. And it also made a very interesting linkages between the propensity or the likelihood of a child getting through the school as a factor of the parents. So in terms of generational progression, or what the economists like to call the under-education trap, if your mother did not go to school or only had primary school teaching, the likelihood is that you at most you would get secondary school. So there's a very nice correlation, and I'm quite happy to share this survey if anybody else wants to look at it. And these numbers just show you the in detail some of the statistics that I was alluding to in the previous slide, and this one is the one on gender. As you can see, the number of women that are not within the schooling system, over 50% at the different phases of schooling. And yeah, this is just further detail. Maybe I should just skip this slide. You can have, you can just try and have a look. I see I'm being reminded of time here. So in mapping a way forward and in conclusion, so what are some of the practical things that we need to do to be able to stimulate, I think, to stimulate the interest of young ladies and girls into the STEM fields? But I think most importantly, also importantly, to ensure that women who are in this field are able to stay in the field, because I think the availability of role models, or the presence of role models in the field, is quite critical. But I think increasingly women also face a lot of pressure trying to find the right balance in terms of the different demands of life. I think the first one is that it's and maybe it's very specific to South Africa in the absence of statistics from other countries, is that it's important that we focus on improving the quality and access to primary education. And some of the projects that we've done specifically in our department was to do a rollout of telematics across rural schools. I mean, we haven't had been able to roll it out to all the schools, but what the telematics does is that it's able to connect students remotely to a teacher whom they would ordinarily not be able to access. So it's able to connect two different geographic locations and being able to connect students. So it's able to bridge the gap in terms of requiring it. You don't require a classroom to be able to to access students. And early access to STEM education and opportunities, this is quite important. And I use the example of the annual science expo that's run by ASCOM, which is very important. What it does is that it just opens up the room for children in primary school education to actually come up with ideas and to prototype these ideas and put them on the table and to be able to learn a bit more about various technologies. And I think what we've seen over the last 3 years is a lot of interest in the renewable energy sector. We've seen a lot of devices that kids are able to produce that they will put on display, and a number of kids are actually selected from the expo and they're sent on to other international expos to be able to compete with peers. The need for support programs, including early career guidance, mentorship, and practical exposure. I think we cannot stress enough the need to have mentors, and for mentors to actually give up their time and to be able to interact with kids and to be able to answer questions and to be able to show practical exposure. Taking a child to a power plant or to a site and to be able to have that experience. I think it's quite important. I always make the joke that my first experience with a computer was actually in my first year of university. So you can imagine that then the experience that you have at that level, at that late stage in life, does impact how you actually progress through your university studies, because you're still struggling in terms of interfacing with technology instead of dealing with content issues. So it's important that early exposure is given to students. And then awareness of how the STEM impacts the world is quite critical, that young girls are able to see that they have the ability to impact the world through solving real life problems, and that they can relate science to real life problems. So I think that awareness is quite important. And like I said earlier, the profiling of role models is quite important, and then leadership and development and training and support for the leaders that are already in the industries, because it's quite important that the women that are already in the field are able to actually provide that leadership and that mentorship to younger kids. There's actually a very interesting theory. It's called the Shines theory, that says that the core is always the same as the top. So if the top is male, the likelihood the core is always going to be male based or biased towards the male. So it's important that we are able to support women leaders, that they get to the top and that they can change the feel and the of organizations or governments or whichever else. So it's important that women leaders are supported, that they're able to be those change agents that are required. And the last one is just a quote that came from the community survey from our statistician general. And it says, if South Africa is to meet the required skills and qualification needed to meet current and future needs of the economy, government not only needs to focus on access to post-secondary education and training, but also to adjust the education so that it increases the intake into the relevant studies, including engineering, physics, and the health sciences. And these are the STEM fields that we are referring to. And yeah, that's just about my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mangola. I think it's been very interesting to listen to you. I have a series of questions, but I'm sure also our audience are sending in theirs. And if they haven't, I definitely encourage everyone to start sending in questions and comments. It is my pleasure to introduce to you now Ms. Sandra Tererai, who's a food scientist and a process improvement specialist who has had the opportunity to apply herself in multiple roles in the manufacturing and engineering space, with exposure across sub-Saharan Africa. She's based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and currently lends her expertise to a Swiss oil and gas company, where she leads the definition and implementation of integrated management systems, health, safety, security, environment, and quality across their East and Southern African affiliates. Sandra has an immense passion for the African continent and is a founder and current executive director of Tangana. Tangana is a movement that actively uses the first regionally integrated approach to empower a generation of rural African girls that change their lives, and contribute to global sustainable development through science, technology, engineering, entrepreneurship, and mathematics. Sandra, it's great to have such an idealist with us today. And like I said before, I'm very much looking forward to learning how it is that you can identify those girls and how you support them in finding what drives them and having a new career. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Awesome. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you, Anna, for that introduction. And thank you, Mahola, for your presentation and definitely giving a clear context, not only of the barriers that women have, not only in science, but in rising in different organizations and corporates, as it were, but also, you know, of the specific South African context as well. I'm from a movement called Taungana, and it's a movement of people who, like me, are very passionate about Africa as a continent. For me personally, this is driven by a lot of work I've done in different sub-Saharan countries, especially in Southern Africa, Zambia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, extending to Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, and just seeing a lot of the discrepancies in terms of, you know, equal representation of women in engineering and science fields, and more so at decision-making levels within those entities. So Taungana is a movement that essentially says we will empower young rural high school girls. If you go into my introductory slide, we empower young rural high school girls basically with the opportunity to access and explore the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, which is your traditional STEM fields. What we are also saying is not only is it important to be exposed to STEM, but to also have an entrepreneur mind around how you approach STEM, how you approach the solutions that you make, you know, for the problems in the different contexts that you find yourself in. And for us, essentially, the rationale, which is my next slide, the rationale around Taungana going specifically into rural communities is that if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, 63% of sub-Saharan Africa is actually classified as rural. And in these rural communities, women are essentially the primary caregivers. Not only are the areas rural, but if we look at all the technological advancements happening globally, they happen in major cities, and more so in the South African context and a lot of the Southern African countries that we have as well. So essentially, with each step of progress that we make in our major cities, the rural towns or communities of Africa are left even a step further behind to the progress that we are trying to achieve. And also, because Africa is a developing continent, a lot of the solutions that we need will be through a technical mind. So if we think of anything from primary healthcare to infrastructure, to basic sanitation issues, access to clean water, all those are specific problems that require very specific technical skills in order to solve. And in South Africa, as well as globally, we are nowhere near having the amount of engineers and scientists that we need to solve our global sustainability issues, as it were. And also, because girls do remain hugely underrepresented in STEM fields in Africa, that is our specific focus for focusing our intervention on girls. So going on to my next slide, just to give you an idea of what our reach is to date, before I go on into explaining the model of how we actually do what we do on a day-to-day basis. We have been in existence for 3 years, which is essentially running our programs in 2014, 2015, and 2016. And the number of specific girls that we call ambassadors that we are grooming and mentoring to be the engineers and scientists of tomorrow is 83. Now, these girls are rural high school girls who are studying at rural high schools within an African province either in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, or South Africa currently. So they span 22 provinces, 28 districts, and across 45 high schools in these countries. And I'll go a little bit into more detail in terms of the criteria that we use to find these girls. Not only is our exposure or our outreach to these specific girls, but we also have mass outreach events where we raise awareness around STEM, not only to female students, but to community leaders, to community elders, to teachers, to parents, and as well as male students, just to create an environment that is supportive for girls, for our ambassadors to actually thrive as young science students that can actually be the engineers and scientists of tomorrow. And essentially what we do with the girls that the 83 ambassadors who attend our flagship program, what essentially they go through is, first of all, exposure to what science looks like in the day-to-day world in a corporate. So to give you a very practical example, if we go to one of our industry champions, a company like BMW, for example, the girls get to be on a simulation where they actually manufacture a car from start to finish, so that they don't only understand the entire production and supply chain of that process, but so that they also understand how critical is it then to have this type of engineer in this specific function, or this type of a scientist in this specific function. We go to Nestle, for example, in the FMCG space as one of our hosts, and what the girls do there is, last year what they did as an example is they got the opportunity to actually make ice cream in the Nestle R&D development lab. And what this does for them is it gives them an opportunity to see that the science that they are learning at school is actually what is applied directly in industry. And not only that, it's something they can take home and actually start applying in their day-to-day lives. So that forms a core part of the program. And as we go through all of these industries, we identify female champions who act as role models for these girls, and they share their story in terms of how they have made it in these fields, be it aeronautical engineering, be it in the aerospace engineering, be it in mining, be it, you know, a whole range of STEM fields that we have identified as critical for the development of the continent within the next decade or two to come. And then the second core part of what they do is they take the learnings that they get from this industry exposure and actually build that into a project that they implement when they go back home. And what is interesting to see is that the themes that come from 3 Southern African countries about the challenges and the problems that need to be solved on the ground are essentially the same, which is, you know, your common things like access to clean water, access to electricity, healthcare issues, sanitation issues, and the list is endless really, but the themes are recurring in each and every annual cycle that we run with these ambassadors. In terms of the movement itself, which is how do we achieve all this, our movement is divided into 4 core pillars, and I'll take you through each one of those pillars briefly. The first one is the fellowship program, which I've just given you a highlight of. And what it is an entrepreneurial boot camp that we have with high potential rural high school girls across Southern Africa. It's held for 1 week in a thriving African city. Currently, that has been Johannesburg, and we use the design thinking methodology and material borrowed from Stanford University to actually drive the principles that we are talking about with the girls that we work with. Now, post this program, the girls go back home and they have to implement the projects in their community. And what we have identified is that it's not enough for them to come into an environment where everything is possible, where they are given all this mentorship, all this exposure and guidance without support when they do go back to their community which is not necessarily wired to think and support them in that way. To that effect, we then have STEM outreach or mass STEM awareness, where we reach out in events and workshops in the ambassador participating communities. So we actually go out to the rural communities of, say, Limpopo in South Africa, Mashingo in Zimbabwe, Copperbolt communities in Zambia, and so on. And we really work to just changing the mindsets of all the people that the young girls have to interact and deal with on their journey to being an engineer or a scientist. Then the next part, or the third element of the movement, is a professional networking platform. So in order for us to have these successful narratives that we share with the girls, to have these role models that we have with the girls, we need to find women and men who are currently in the STEM fields, who are engaging and participating and willing to be role models, to be mentors for these young girls. And not only that, they also need a platform where they can encourage each other within the field, talk about different issues, debate, have speaker series, and that sort of thing. Then the last element is research output. So because we are essentially in a space that has very limited information in terms of what the STEM education outputs are for rural communities, what are the exact challenges and which interventions have actually worked, part of what we are committed to doing is to clarify the problem as much as we can, given the data that we continually collect in the rural communities that we work, and then also advise or have concrete evidence of what the status of STEM education is in rural areas in Southern Africa, and ideally push that or have participation in policy or in national agendas or regional agendas. And there's a SADC protocol, for example, that fosters to have science interfaces between the different countries and having different professionals from these communities working on regional solutions, because a lot of the challenges that we face as a region are very similar, and we need all the brain power we can get to actually deal with the different issues that we have. So that is a critical element that is in the background, but is a critical element to make sure that not only us as Taungana, but all of the other interventions that we're trying to push forward in terms of getting young girls, especially young African girls, into the STEM field are actually successful and continually tailored to address the specific challenges that they face. So going a little bit deeper behind the scenes into the selection process in terms of what, who would be participating as a Taungana ambassador. So we are referring to the 83 ambassadors that we are proud to have on board to date. The first thing is we select these girls through a rural high school. So they obviously must be female and they must be studying science subjects at their school. So that is your physical science, physics, chemistry, biology, math, and there's a whole range more depending on the specific school and the curriculum that it offers. What we are also looking for in the school is that the school must have a good national examination pass rate. I think that one of the silent barriers to entry in STEM and engineering, if you like, engineering and science domains, is there's a very technical requirement in terms of the subjects and the tertiary qualification that you need to have studied. So what we're saying is we need to identify students that already have the aptitude for math and science, so that sure that they can grasp those concepts and they can, excel at those subjects, and then we ignite their passion in terms of what can they do with that ability to understand math, with that ability to understand science. How can they actually use that to creatively solve for issues in their community, as well as make money while they're doing it, which is a core focus of our entrepreneurial curriculum as well. So that gives you a highlight of the kind of school and the kind of girl that we have as a Taungana ambassador. I think we now have an entire archive, if you like, of success stories of Taungana ambassadors. If I take a few from our pioneer group in 2014, for example, we had, I see a timer, okay. We had one girl, Chelsea, for example, who came in, and she was 3 years off from finishing high school. She actually finished high school last year. And not only did she manage to implement a project around personal hygiene for young girls in her school, but she also went on to graduate with flying colors and is now studying medicine in Zimbabwe. So we have a whole range of these young girls who are finding what their exact passion in science is, and then taking that to the tertiary level. Then I would just like to end essentially with a call to action, and this is fed by our challenges and wins within, with running Taungana and working specifically with rural communities to promote rural high school girls to go into STEM. I think in the short to medium term, it's important for us to continually have champions, female champions who own the success narrative and who can be role models and mentors to our young girls. It's important that we have funding partners that are looking for a mutually beneficial relationship in terms of how do we get more and more girls into the STEM industry, and also industry partners where we can bring students with a more creative notion of what it means to expose them to what science and engineering means. And then also what is key, because of the communities that we deal with, is it's important that we address the issue of connectivity, especially in Africa, in rural Africa. That remains a challenge and is a huge barrier in terms of leveling the playing field in terms of what young girls in rural communities have access and exposure to. And then in the long term, what we are looking at is building strategic partnerships that are beyond show and tell. So I guess one of the funny but unfortunate things of the nonprofit or social space, as it were, is it's sometimes way easier for different partners to be interested in a once-off check and an event, that is specifically marketed and whatever the case is. But what we're saying is, for us to have an engineer today, it's a long way to go. So we need to be able to support that entire journey, whether it's study assistance, mentoring, coaching, tertiary support, and entry-level professional support to actually make sure that they stay within the industry, or at least become very productive within the sphere of STEM that they have chosen to be in. So definitely we would love to hear from you in terms of what we can do better, how we can partner with you around these things. And just a note to everyone that we will be having our 4th annual Taungana STEM Expo, which is the boot camp I referred to earlier, in August 2017. So we hope to be interacting with you, be it through industry or on social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sandra. It's been really interesting listening to you and how impressive it is, the work that you're doing. I wanted to remark a little, though, on a comment that you made, that you were referring to the fact that this is happening in Southern Africa, that is a developing region. However, I was reading yesterday a report by Microsoft, and it was focusing on why girls in Europe were entering STEM at lower levels than boys, and also following career paths. And I think that this participation of girls and women in the energy sector is one of the clearest elements that crosses borders and levels of economic levels of countries. And I wanted to put that note there for two things. Well, because right now we're going to make the step into a cross-continental initiative, but also because there was something that stayed with me from that report that said that a lot of these girls, I think in the UK was almost 80%, said that they would be more willing to enter the STEM fields if they knew that there was no wage gap. So I'm wondering if now that we're going to have Marie Horowitz with us, if we could also have some of that impact of how it is that when young women are in the sector, what it is that they're faced with, and what kind of initiatives are there to support them. And while I say that, I would like to share with you that Anne-Marie has been with the U.S. Energy Department since 2009, where she has established a rapidly growing Women in STEM and Women in Energy initiative. She currently serves as a management analyst with the Office of Environment, Health, Safety, and Security. She's working for the Associate Undersecretary to support communications, external and congressional affairs, and special projects. And Marie also manages the international work of the Clean Energy Education and Empowerment C3E initiative of the Department of Energy, a program designed to inspire more women to enter leadership roles in the clean energy sector. And Marie, we're very happy to listen in to your presentation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anna and Maria, for having me on today. As you mentioned in the introduction remarks, I know I was connected to this webinar through the Power Africa group and our interagency work. And I do want to highlight that here in the United States, we have an interagency working group on women and girls in STEM that has been going pretty strong for the last maybe 6 years now. And it's a great way that we exchange information about these programs and try to stay coordinated and help each other out and make the best use of our limited resources. So I just wanted to say thank you for having me on again. So the Clean Energy Education Empowerment Initiative, I'll just go ahead and refer to it as C3E from here on out. Obviously, there's 3 E words in the title, so that's where we get that snazzy title from. We have been really excited about this work, and it's been going strong since 2010, launched at the Clean Energy Ministerial. Like you said in the introduction, it's an international program. I'll just give you a little highlight of what the Clean Energy Ministerial is. We have the Clean Energy Ministerial. It's a really high-level global forum that promotes policies and programs, really advancing clean energy technology, sharing lessons learned, best practices, encouraging really looking at the global energy economy. And you can learn more about that if you want to. There's a framework posted on the Clean Energy Ministerial's website, which will go over the mission, objectives, the membership there. It's a pretty long list, includes Australia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, China, Denmark, the European Commission, Finland, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Korea, Mexico, Norway, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, and the UAE, the UK, and the US. So that's who's in the Clean Energy Ministerial. So and kicked it off. And you'll probably hear more updates about this initiative at the 8th Annual Clean Energy Ministerial meeting, which is held in Beijing this year, June 6th through 8th. So just to kind of bookmark that if you're interested in more updates on this initiative. So really C3E, what we're trying to do here is to shift the status quo on the clean energy professions and encourage greater gender diversity in these professions. Obviously, this is scientifically based. Women only hold a small percentage of STEM careers. I don't really need to go through that with you guys because our 2 great presenters just did that. I'm really setting the tone for why gender diversity in STEM professions is so important. So C3E works to accomplish that. Domestically, I'll give you a little highlight of what we're doing in the US. We have an annual symposium that's about 250, 300 people attend that every year to talk about really getting into the weeds of clean energy technologies. It's been a pretty exciting program, and there is some talk about women in the workforce, but it's really focused on energy technologies. At that symposium, we announced the awardees. We have an annual award program It's actually going on right now, and I'd love for you guys to click over on another tab on your browser and open up c3eawards.org. That is, we'll have information about the nomination process going on right now, and I think the organizers can share that link in the webinar chat. And we are collecting information about our nominations about mid-career level women in clean energy. I really want to highlight that because it's a good best practice, I think, for organizations doing outreach on engaging women in the energy sector to use through the awards program. Not only do we get awesome nominations for winners, they do receive a cash prize given by MIT and Stanford, obviously key academic institutions of the United States. So in addition to that prize, the spotlight that they get is pretty exciting for them too, because it's good for the program. We have a lot of marketing out there. Hey, everyone nominate someone for these awards, and it casts a light back on what C3E is, reminds people that the program exists, and highlights past winners every year. Some of those past winners have been like women in South Africa doing outreach to connect communities to solar. And just to highlight that, because I know a few of you on the webinar from that region, but we're just really excited about that program. And then it also helps us capture ambassadors. So those are pretty senior level women who may not be a good fit for the mid-level awards, but are pretty powerful people who we have come on board. I know you just talked about ambassadors in the last program. These ambassadors are women who are speaking publicly about the impact and importance of engaging women in the energy sector. And they hold events throughout the year. So for more information, I wanted to put my ask up front because I know we're fairly limited on time. Please go to c3enet.org. This is a really interactive website. It's kind of like a LinkedIn, Facebook, blog post all together. You can find other women in clean energy. You can read about upcoming events. You can nominate someone for the awards. There's a link right there. And it's open for everybody, and it's a worldwide hub. So that is one of the pretty exciting things that C3Net has done. That is the URL right there, c3net.org. And I'll just breeze through these since I know we're really at time, but I'm happy to answer any other questions via email or afterwards. So just to give you a flavor of the program, we've had 21 international ambassadors. Those are named by governments. So if you are interested in that program, your government would need to contact the U.S. government here through me and nominate someone to be an ambassador. We've had really great programming. Saudi Arabia had, I'll just show you this picture from their Smart Grid conference, and it was pretty exciting to see. They had we just named an ambassador from Saudi Arabia earlier this year, and they hosted a panel at their Smart Grid conference, bringing together all these women and energy, and it's fantastic to see that kind of action abroad. We've had, this again is just kind of the goals of this program. Wanted to mention what we're trying to do internationally to expand this work is connecting it with the International Energy Agency. There are thousands of experts there working on what's called TCP, Technology Collaboration Program. That could be a cross-cutting way to connect this work to everyone on this phone call. We would have the ability to leverage the work that's already going on in countries and then to expand it. So I know you can get more information about the TCPs at this website here, iea.org/TCP, just to learn about what it is. The goals of this TCP, the Technology Collaboration Program, would really be sharing best practices, doing workforce analysis and needs. And I wanted to highlight, we have a great blog on C3Net about women in the clean energy workforce through a U.S. employment report. Also developing these leadership programs, summits, mentoring networks, a lot of the tactics that you guys have talked about on the call already. So stay tuned for more information about that. Where additional countries have spoken to say they're interested in it. We've had Sweden and Canada were the ones who really proposed this program to the IEA. And if you would like to talk to your government about being involved, we welcome that conversation. It is open. And you do not have to be a member of the IEA in order to support this. in November, you can expect to see the next annual C3 symposium. And also just a reminder to everyone that we are in Women's History Month right now for March, and March 8th is International Women's Day. So please take advantage of those news hooks to promote your programs. So since we're a little over time, Anna and Maria, I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you did great with time. And Marty, I do hope that we'll have some time to go a little bit further into a little bit more of detail with you. So right now, please, for those participants who have questions or would like clarifications at some point, do share them with us. I want to have, I do have a question for Magola. And there was a comment made during your presentation in terms of supporting girls or the importance of having girls understand the impact that they could have on the world through solving problems. And I'm trying to connect this to the renewable energy sector and to the innovation. And I was wondering if there's anything in that comment that you made that you could reflect on exactly what I just said, on the linkages between solving problems and whether or not you have seen a stronger inclination from girls to work on renewable aspects. And I'm not sure if Sandra, if you also have a comment in that respect, if you would like to join. Magola?
Yes, so is somebody else speaking? No, I'm getting feedback. Okay, from my side. Thanks for that question, Anna. I think it's about being able to link real life problems to potential, engineering or scientific solution, and this is exactly what the opportunity that exists with the annual Science Expo is. So if you look at from an energy perspective as an example, girls, and particularly women and girls, interact a lot with energy usage in terms of the household. So if you look at a very traditional role, and I'm saying that with a bit of precaution, but this would be the appropriate ambassador in any household in terms of how the different types of energy sources that you would have in a household. So what we have with the expo on science, the Young Scientist Expo that we have, is we get young people to actually walk into a laboratory environment to be able to say, I'm having this kind of a problem. Let's just say you're not connected to the grid where you live at the moment, but there is solar technology. What kind of devices could you put together to be able to have lighting for your house, to be able to have lighting for your community, to be able to have a library for your community that has lighting that could open for longer hours such that students are able to study and so forth. So it's about saying, define a problem that exists within your locality, and here are the tools. Are you able to devise a solution that would actually impact and actually change your way of life, change your productivity, change the economy around yourself. So I think it's around using science to solve real life problems. So it's not a very theoretical thing.
Thank you. Sandra, is there anything you would like to contribute, perhaps on that line of thought?
I think I'd very much agree with Mahola that it's not theoretical at all. We work in rural Africa, and like she said, girls and women engage the most with energy within the household setting, be it from lighting, cooking for the family, extending to things even like doing the laundry and ironing, etc. So for us, we find a lot of solutions, a lot of issues rather that are raised in the energy space. And what we do is create an environment where the girls can come up with a creative alternative or something that would essentially make their community better. And just in the way of an example, one of the projects that was listed as a finalist last year, for example, was a girl who was concerned about the amount of time from the Eastern Cape. Her name is Alwaba. She was concerned about the amount of time it takes just to iron her school uniform and for her entire family, because she has that role within her house. And she had a solution that resonated very much with the nuclear crowd. I don't want to mention the elements because I'll mix them up. But what she essentially proposed, for example, was a spray that could actually iron. And so we encourage that kind of creativity where we're saying, think out of the box, here are the tools, and then let's bring it back to reality in terms of how do you then actually implement a practical solution given the resources available, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Thanks. And Sandra, I want to continue with you on one question. When you were doing your presentation, you spoke about connectivity of the rural schools, and connectivity could mean very different things to very different people.
Sure.
So I wanted to give you the opportunity to expand a little bit more on what you meant by that, so that we know everyone's understanding what you meant by the need to have more connectivity.
So I guess if I could clump it into key themes, it's a function of infrastructure. In a lot of the rural schools that we work in, for example, there isn't electricity to start with, as an example. And then even the schools that you do have electricity or an alternative source of energy, those schools are not necessarily equipped with computers or computer labs for the students or for the teachers. And not everyone within those communities will have a smartphone. Where students have access to a smartphone, it might belong to one of their parents, for example. Where they do have that smartphone, data is not exactly affordable for low-income families in South Africa and in a lot of communities within Southern Africa. And then there's also the awareness around, if you were connected, what's open to you, what world is open to you if you know what to look for and where to look for. So I guess if I can sort of summarize it that way in a series of how the connectivity challenge builds up.
Thank you. And Marie, I wanted to go back to you in terms of you mentioned that in the US specifically, there is this interagency organization working on girls and STEM. And I was wondering, given that we have also examples of that before, could you elaborate a little bit further in the different kind of conversations, but also maybe initiatives that are available in the US?
Sure, happy to do that. So I run an interagency working group on women and girls in STEM. So it's not really a program as much as a collection of individuals working from the different agencies on these issues who gather and exchange information. This is really helpful, though, for a number of reasons. For instance, one of the past items that we did was to create a train the trainer workshop for women from, and it's open to men as well, but from different federal agencies to attend for a day and learn how to bring a training back to their organization that trains federal employees how to do outreach to students so they can become STEM role models. So that program rose out of this working group. We used the working group to recruit people to attend the program, and we had about 40 federal personnel are now trained to do a training at their agencies. So we're really excited about that. I know a lot of the previous presenters, as well as many of you on the line, know the importance of role models, and what better way to showcase over 200,000 STEM professionals within the federal government than to get them out there to be role models. So that's one example of what the working group has done. We have also coordinated messaging around events in terms of like Women's History Month, for example. You'll see agencies kind of cross-promoting each other on social media, that kind of a thing, and really staying in touch with what other agencies are doing for outreach helps everyone to have more powerful communications. We have millions of followers in our social media channels through the federal government, and we want to utilize those to really showcase some of the great work that the agencies are doing on women in STEM. We also have briefings at those meetings that help agency leads in this area know what each other is doing. So, for instance, last week we had the National Science Foundation in the U.S. give a presentation on a program called Includes. That's an acronym. So just type into your search browser INCLUDES and in all caps, and you'll find the National Science Foundation program. It's a grant-making program that is providing millions of dollars to help connect, trying to find best practices and then to create hubs of groups working on those best practices to really move the needle when it comes to STEM outreach and education. So, so we have briefings like that. So, and we hope to do more. So happy to take back any feedback from you guys on what else to use these kind of groups for. But that's an exciting way that we do our work. So thanks for asking.
And thanks for sharing. It's really interesting to hear, and I wanted to keep you on the line because I have a question very much related to the role models that you were sharing now, but it's a question for all three of you. So I'll go back to Magola and Sandra too. The question says, first of all, thank you for the webinar. I'm from Europe, and even the equal opportunities, a huge gap between boys and girls exists when considering STEM. Do you believe that the presence of feminine roles in mass media, and you were alluding to that, can help to change the mind of these boys, of these girls, sorry? Anne-Marie?
Oh, sorry, I was about to ask if that was a question for me. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it's for all three, but if you could start.
Sure. I'm happy to start on that. The United States that's absolutely true. Men are much more portrayed, especially in like science positions, in movies and books and TV, and that is important when you're talking about internalizing messages about what women and girls think that they can do. That matters. And so the White House in the last administration, the Office of Science and Technology Policy did have an initiative where they were in touch with media to try to bring people together and talk about what initiatives they can do. If you look at, I'll give you one example of something that could be incredibly powerful. This is not an endorsement of a particular company, but I do want to tell you that if you look on YouTube, you can find the General Electric campaign. It's called Women Scientists Should Be Celebrities, or something like that. If you're looking for that phrase, you'll find it. Why women scientists should be celebrities, from GE. There is a really amazing video that showcases Millie Dresselhaus. Millie Dresselhaus actually just passed away a couple weeks ago, and she was the first Lifetime Achievement winner for the C3E program. So in addition to our, like I said, our mid-career level awardees, we have Lifetime Awards, and Millie Dresselhaus won that. So it features her, but it's just an example of what incredible power we could have through mass media if women scientists are celebrities. So look at that video, it'll speak for itself, and I'm sure you guys can see how powerful that is and something that we could really all get behind.
Thank you. And I see that Maria has already shared at least the link for, if I'm not mistaken, the National Science Foundation and the grant making that you were mentioning. So for those of you participants, if you go to the chat function, you'll see the link. Sandra Magola, would you also like to reflect a little bit more on this opportunity of featuring women scientists in mass media?
I think definitely it's important to do that, because for a long time, while we are arguing that we don't have enough females in this field, there have been women, for example, in these fields that have been instrumental in a lot of things, but their stories have never been shared. I recently watched Hidden Figures, which is an American production of 3 African American women that were instrumental to the space program, along with a whole lot of other women. And I think it was the producer who said something when he was asked about how come these stories were never shared, and he said something to the effect of, there's the sexism of it, there's the racism of it, but even more so, there's the fact that we don't do parades for scientists. We do the parade for the astronaut, So that for me was really key to say, we do need to have these stories, these models out in the open for everyone to see and be inspired. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Magola, would you like to also comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with the other panelists. I think the profiling of women is quite critical in mass media. It's important that we start to mainstream the presence of women in STEM, so that it's not just come across as an event, but that in a natural course of day there are women out there, scientists that are doing work that are in this environment. That it's important that we start, and I think it's the one way that is quite important in terms of naturalizing, for lack of a better word, the presence of women in maths and science, and I think it's also important in terms of showing progress of advancement of women in the STEM field. So I think it's absolutely critical that we are able to profile women, but to also have a broader pool of women and not have to recycle the same faces over and over again. So I think it is quite important to have the profile and to also be able to show young girls that some environments are actually natural, that it's not as intimidating as one would have thought historically.
Thank you. On that note, I'm going to ask Maria to do a little bit of research and share with you, all of you, a link that actually highlights the contribution of African women in the energy sector. And it was developed by Power Africa. It's a blog, and it features several women who have been innovators, and I just think it would be good in terms of keeping up and highlighting new faces and examples. So Maria, if you could share that with us, and also that gives me the opportunity to share what I think is the last question with you. And Sandra and Magola, this may be a little more targeted to you. It says, I work on training programs with companies of electricity across Africa, and some of them face strong financial challenges. My question is, how do you engage them in developing and promoting women within the company and show them it is a priority for their business performance? More generally, how do you engage industries of the power sector in the topic of women empowerment? Sandra, I'm not sure if you can answer to this, especially because you are in the process of linking with private sector.
Yeah, so I guess there's 2 parts to the question. The first part, which is how do we work with them to promote women who are already within those organizations, if I understood that correctly?
Yes, that's right.
So essentially for us, while our focus remains largely on the rural high school girls that we do work with, the champions that we work with in industry, the female role models, we work with them in a manner that allows them to get exposed to, to the management of their company, for example, as they share their stories, their journeys within their organizations and their career profile. So it's not really a large-scale effort, but in terms of what we as Tangana do is we identify those champions not only so that they inspire our girls, but also so that they get, a platform within to the management of their companies while they're supporting our program, essentially. And then there was the second part of the question. Please repeat that for me.
Yeah, which is how do you engage industries of the power sector in the topic of women empowerment?
So we work with a number of industries in the, we've partitioned the different industries that we work with into segments, and where power and energy is concerned, we work with Eskom, which is the national provider of electricity in South Africa, and we also work with the Nuclear Energy Corporation of South Africa. So we engage them primarily to understand what they are doing and what opportunities exist for girls to come through and learn where they can be part of tomorrow's solution in those fields. So those would be the organizations that we go and have activities with, like we explained, in terms of this is what we are doing in this space, and this is how it impacts your communities, and this is what you can do directly now while you're still in high school within your communities. So the industry exposure part is a key component of what we do. We do not limit it only to power industries, because for us the domain of STEM is broader than the power industries, but we do have some core industry partners in the energy and power side that we work with.
Thanks. And Magola, perhaps very briefly on that level of engaging with the power sector, and specifically because of the position that you have on DPE, is there something that you could share with us in terms of how you engage with the companies to address gender considerations in their work?
Thanks, Anna. I think maybe the first part to your question about how do we get companies that have fiscal constraints to still invest. I think there is the one aspect of the problem is how we continue to view the development of women and the inclusion of women as on a project sort of like basis. Organizations need to view the inclusion of women into their organization as in the course of business and as a very critical investment that they need to make to ensure that they've got diversity, which is very important for innovation, for contribution, and for growth and expansion of the organization. So I think it would be pretty much problematic for an organization to say, we're facing fiscal constraints, we therefore are not going to invest in women. So it means you're changing the bias towards something else. I mean, in the course of doing business, you will require engineers, you require artisans, you require technicians. It's important that in the face of development and advancement of women where we are, that there is a bias towards including women in organizations. So I would not be very keen to have a conversation that says, it's an issue to be debated with organization. And I think it's quite unfortunate that governments have to actually legislate in order to see changes within the sector. So I think organizations need to see their value on their own in terms of the investment of investing in women. And I suppose the instrument that government has is, in terms of procurement, is that you can impose these targets in terms of spend where money must be spent. But I think we want to have the sort of mature leaders who are going to actually take up the challenge of transformation of society and the inclusion of women as a challenge that they would take up on themselves to see it through, to ensure that it does actually succeed, and that is something that doesn't need to be, policed and enforced by a government for it to be successful.
Thank you. And I'm aware it's time for us to start wrapping up. So Magola, while I'll have you on the line, I would like to ask you to share with us and the rest of the participants your takeaway message. If you could, please.
Sure. I think two key takeaways for me. I think it's the fact that we need to be involved a bit more involved. And I like what Sandra calls it, and she says we are a movement I think it's up to each one of us to play a certain role, whether it's a legislative role, a policy role, a leader, a mentor, a change agent. It's important that women who are already in the industry, who are in the sector, actually play a role to ensure that there is that change that we get to see. And this could be through a lot of programs that each one of us has, or through the time that we all offer to be able to ensure that the reach to young girls is broader. My second take is around, the inclusion of women in the sector, has to be naturalized to some extent, has to be mainstreamed, and that at some point in this century, it has to be something that becomes a normal course of doing business, and that we move away from it being a struggle as we continue to have it, and that requires responsible leadership, leaders in society, leaders in government, and to be able to see the value of actually having women fully participating in the various sectors within society, including energy, including science, including space projects, and whatever else. But that there has to be that internalization of the value of actually doing the work. So and I think once there is that buy-in in the top leadership of organizations of society, then it becomes far easier for us to be able to lay the foundation for young girls. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra, if you could share with us your takeaway message.
Sure, thanks, Anna. I think that given the context, of getting women into a specific domain, which is STEM, and more specifically energy, I think what is very clear is that for us, if we can put it into context, for us to have one fully qualified engineer or scientist changing the energy landscape, as an example, that journey starts at least 25 to 30 years before, which is essentially when they are born. And they need a clear support structure or system or ecosystem for them to finally be that engineer that we are looking for. And I think that what's important is that we all join the global move, to bring more female brains still at a young age into this domain, so that they're champions we want to see tomorrow. And I think the best part of it is you only have to be one small piece of the puzzle, right? We've had 3 different presentations from different contexts in terms of how we're achieving this, but together collectively with all these efforts, then we can achieve the picture we want to see tomorrow.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, to you the honor to close this with your takeaway message.
That is an honor, so thank you so much. It's fantastic presenting with you guys, and thank you for those on the line for your time and listening to this. And I know our time is so valuable, and my message is that this is not a spectator sport, and involving more women in the energy sector, we all need to get out and do more. That could be from anything from being a role model yourself, taking an active leadership position, connecting with other people who are doing similar work in your sector. Start a working group to talk about these issues. I mean, no one, is going to. I think that was one of the first comments, that women are sometimes waiting to be asked to do something, and don't wait. I think that we should all be active, be engaged, and this work matters. So your time is valuable, and this is something that is worth spending it on.
Thank you. And acknowledging that time is valuable, but also knowledge is valuable. I want to thank you 3 for sharing your experiences and your knowledge with us, and I thank the audience for their attendance and the interesting questions that they've been posting. I want to close by inviting all of you to our next webinar. We are still negotiating the times and date exactly for it with the panelists, but be tuned. We're going to be organizing a webinar on energy policies and gender indicators. towards the end of March. So keep tuned and we'll update you on the latest of the time and dates. I also want to thank again USAID for their constant support in making this webinar series happen. And I want to just alert you that Maria is sharing with you a link on a previous webinar session we had in the beginning of 2016 on the challenges and strategies to increase and retain women's participation in the energy sector. So if you're interested in the topic, feel free to link in to take a look at that webinar too, that you'll find in our green platform, the Gender Renewable Energy platform. And on that note too, I just want to remind you that we will be uploading the video, so the audio of this webinar and its presentations into our website soon. So stay tuned. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be with you today. And thank you again for your attention.